The Washington Commanders make a splash trade for Deebo Samuel, but I don't think it moves the needle. That and more on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready, Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome in to the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today for a second episode in a row by Locked On NFL expert, the legacy, Louis DiBiase. On today's episode, we're breaking down all the big news from the NFL weekend. What do the Giants and Jets do at quarterback next after Matthew Stafford goes back to the Rams, like we were telling you? At first, Deebo Samuel traded to the Washington Commanders. Before we dive into that, though, do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen and for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Louis, saw the news. My quick instant reaction is, okay.
Yeah, I think that's I had a similar reaction to Deebo Samuel going to Washington. I think in a vacuum, what they gave up isn't bad. And for a number 2 receiver next to Terry McLaurin, it's good. I don't think this is their version of like the A.J. Brown trade for Philadelphia. I don't think it moves the needle like that at all.
No, I'm with you there. And for the full details on what took place over the weekend with Deebo Samuel and Washington Commanders, we go to my guy David Harrison from Locked On Commanders.
Despite everybody's expectations, the Washington Commanders unlocked their championship window in 2024 by trading for San Francisco 49ers wide receiver Deebo Samuel. They're pushing that bad boy wide open. I'm David Harrison of Locked On Commanders, and I can confirm on Saturday night that the Washington Commanders are trading for San Francisco 49ers wide receiver Deebo Samuel. Right now reported at a 5th-round pick, and that the Commanders are taking all of that money. And this is one of the full shift moments. The Washington Commanders franchise has been turning around ever since Josh Harris became the managing partner of that new ownership group here for the franchise. But then with the hiring of Adam Peters to be the general manager, head coach Dan Quinn to be the leader of this team and help institute this new culture that he says the players set forth. They're doing things the right way. And Deebo Samuel is someone that general manager Adam Peters knows very well from their shared time in San Francisco. They believe he is a commander, and guys like Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin, et cetera, are going to make sure that he comes in. And if he's not already, is going to be a part of the standard that they set in 2024, will continue to grow in 2025 as they continue to try to chase down the Philadelphia Eagles and win their franchise's 4th Super Bowl trophy. For more on this trade and everything that comes with it, check out the Locked On Commanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Look, I'm with you. It was relatively cheap. A 5th-round pick. That's the same thing that DeAndre Hopkins went for earlier in the year, way back when Dallas traded Amari Cooper. It was around a 5th-round pick, I do believe. But I guess the idea that this opens up the Super Bowl window for the Commanders, I just don't see this move as that. If they would have traded for Myles Garrett or Max Crosby or a high-level player like that, then I would have agreed. I think that the perception of Deebo Samuel is maybe a couple of years past what it actually is, or a couple of years before what it is now. And that's something that I've heard a lot in, the NFL industry, is that, most fans are about 2 years behind where a lot of these players actually are, the big name players. And Deebo Samuel has had some great moments. His versatility is very alluring to a fan because he's so exciting to watch. But the reality is, as a pure wide receiver, he doesn't get open enough. His speed has dropped off, which means the yards after catchability has dropped off. I hate to be, body language doctor or anything, but he doesn't look like he's in peak shape at this point either whenever you see him play. So I guess it may have been cheap, but it's not, I don't care how cheap it is. It doesn't really change the end trajectory for the Washington Commanders, in my opinion. They still need much more.
Yeah, and look, in a vacuum, I love the idea of trying to surround your star quarterback with talent while he's on that rookie deal. I love the idea. I think that's how the Eagles won a Super Bowl, continuing to do that with Jalen Hurts and not settling. He's a really good, I think, number 2 next to Terry McLaurin. He's not going to be asked to be that number 1 alpha wide receiver on the outside. For a 5th-round pick, I think it's a good move. But yeah, the value, Tyler, what they got for what they gave up shows you who the player is at this point. And I think last year he did look lackadaisical. He looked unhealthy, like injury-wise, and just, yeah, I mean, if they get the 2023 version of Deebo Samuel that had almost 900 receiving yards, 7 touchdowns, he had 5 touchdowns on the ground, then it's a steal for a 5th-round pick. But yeah, I think the name value says wide receiver 1 more so than the actual player does. I completely agree with you there. But again, for who he's going to be asked to be in Washington, I think it's a good move.
Yeah, I think for what they paid, and he's going to have like a $5 million cap hit. There's a little bit of a roster bonus, but it'll move forward to the next year and things like that. Like, I don't think that the Commanders gave up a ton. I guess my point overall is that I don't think it increased the ceiling of the team in an exponential way, even if it was a good value deal. I think one of the things that I'm going to be watching for is we hear these rumors and even public comments that Deebo Samuel maybe doesn't want to do some of the backfield stuff and some of the run game stuff because it wears him down more. But what I would argue is where Deebo Samuel and A.J. Brown were compared in like skill set because of their yards after catch ability, A.J. Brown is a way better wide receiver. Right. And if Deebo Samuel isn't providing that value as a pseudo running back in the backfield and isn't having that versatility, well, then his value goes down significantly. So it's like with a running quarterback, like, hey, don't run a lot because we don't want you to get hurt.
Yeah.
But if you don't run, you aren't really the best version of yourself. You kind of have to, you know what I mean? So I think how Deebo Samuel is used with Cliff Kingsbury in Washington will really determine how I truly feel about this move for them. Because if he's just going to play wide receiver and he's doing this and they agreed to not use him out of the backfield too much, then I don't think that, he's a game-changing player in any way.
Yeah, I understood Deebo Samuel's point about not wanting to be used like a running back in 2021. Yeah, 2022, when he was looking for that big deal, when he was on that rookie contract, I totally understand. In 2021, 2022, that was his highest usage rate in the backfield. Then I understood. But now you've gotten paid. You're not the alpha wide receiver of an A.J. Brown. Right. I agree. I think your value right now for Washington is being used in the backfield. So at the time of when he didn't want to be used that way, I understand. But now if you're the Commanders, I don't think you hold back at all using Deebo in that pseudo-gadget role because, like you said, I mean, even in San Francisco the last few years, he wasn't that go-to guy at receiver. That was Brandon Ayuk. Right. So and that's why they paid him as such. And they drafted another receiver in the first round in San Francisco last year. So, yeah, again, in a vacuum, I like the move. I think it helps the Commanders. But is it that... Again, A.J. Brown's a move I keep comparing it to because I cover the Eagles, but that move really catapulted the Eagles from a playoff team to a championship contender. I don't think that move does this for Washington. Luckily for them, they have a Terry McLaurin, and they don't need him to be their A.J. Brown.
Yeah, what I would compare it to, honestly, is the Stephon Diggs trade.
Sure, yeah.
That's what I see it is. Where Stephon Diggs' name value was higher than what his value was in the league, actually kind of slowed down with Buffalo. Good player, but at the time when it happened, everybody was like, oh, the Texans are Super Bowl contenders now. And I'm like, I don't really see this. It makes them better, but I don't think it takes the ceiling through the roof or anything like that. Yeah. So I think we're in agreement on that. A good move in theory for Washington, but I don't think we could say, now their Super Bowl window is open. But with that being said, speaking of keeping the Super Bowl window open, Matthew Stafford back to Los Angeles, as we tried to tell you all along. Do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off and want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or I'm picking a player to hit a clutch 3. I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Louis, let's continue today's edition of the Locked On NFL podcast, recapping all of the big news from the NFL weekend that was. We talked about the Deebo Samuel trade to the Washington Commanders, why it's a good move, but wouldn't call it a great move or anything like that. But now we got to talk about a move that I think is great from both sides, and it's something that, Louis, I know we had talked about it on the show. I've talked about it with several other hosts throughout the week as well. It always made the most sense for Matthew Stafford's next team to be his old team in the Los Angeles Rams. And finally, over the weekend, we got some finality in that regard, and our guys from Locked On Rams talked about the move.
After weeks of wild speculation, you had Giants receivers tweeting Rams emojis at number 9. You had a wild rumor that Tom Brady was raising up Matthew Stafford in Montana, taking him on a ski trip to recruit him to the Raiders. Well,
started a Starbucks fight.
Yeah, exactly. It was crazy. You had insiders fighting at a Starbucks in Indianapolis over it, Travis. It was insane. After all of that, Matthew Stafford and the Los Angeles Rams are in agreement on a new deal, a restructured deal that will have him back with this Rams organization. He was not going to be playing on the current contract. They had to get a new deal done. They gave his agent permission to communicate and negotiate with other teams to test his value out. And look, yes, Matthew Stafford should not have a worse contract than Kirk Cousins or Jared Goff or guys like that. They saw there was more money out there for him, but at the end of the day, by all accounts, he took less money to get back to this comfortable situation where they were 14 yards away from hosting an NFC Championship game at home with a chance to get it to a Super Bowl. So the Rams are running it back with Matthew Stafford.
Again, always made the most sense. We talked about Matthew Stafford potentially going to the Giants, potentially going to the Raiders, and it was always a situation of, okay, he wants to get paid, but he would have to just solely care about his next contract and not care whatsoever about winning football games to want to go to the Jets or to want to go to the Giants or to want to go to the Raiders. So I can see why those teams would be interested, but it does at the end of the day look like this was just a ploy for Matthew Stafford to get a little bit more money from the Rams.
Yeah, and I completely understand Matt Stafford wanting more money. I think he is very underpaid considering you look at some other quarterbacks that are getting a lot more than him. And he's a better quarterback, even who he is right now. As they mentioned, like he was a few plays away from taking down the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles and hosting an NFC title. I think they likely beat Washington in that game and get to the Super Bowl themselves. And then who knows what happens? You might be talking about a 2-time champ in Matt Stafford. So I get why he wanted to get paid, but unless the Jets, the Giants, the Raiders are offering you 10 times the money of the Rams, like you said, unless he exclusively cared about the money, it always made sense to go back to LA if the deals are somewhat close. So I'm glad they could come to a middle ground for the Rams because I don't think they are far away from competing with Philadelphia. I honestly think they're right there with Washington. They might actually be my second favorite team in the NFC when it comes to the likelihood of getting to the championship next year.
Well, last year, even though they got off to a slow start throughout the process, I was pretty adamant like, hey, the Rams are my team that's out of the playoffs right now that I think will get in. Hey, I think the Rams are a team that may be a wild card right now that could win a playoff game. Like I was pretty high on them the whole time, and honestly, I feel like that paid off. So, excuse me, I get too excited talking about all this action from the NFL weekend. But looking at the Rams, I guess their next big decision would have to be what happens with Cooper Kupp. I think you would like to have Cooper Kupp back at this point if you can find a way to make it make sense financially. And speaking of the finances, you mentioned Matthew Stafford. His cap hit is whatever, but his actual cash that he was set to get paid this year was $27.5 million, which is probably about half what he's worth realistically on the open market. So getting that extra money, but now that they have this kind of figured out, they're working on the contract still, what it's going to be, but both sides have just agreed, hey, we're coming back. What do you do with Cooper Kupp now, knowing that you were that close to succeeding? Would you still look to trade him and maybe look to upgrade in the draft or make a different move? Or are you trying to keep Cooper Kupp back in town?
See, I kind of want to run it back if I'm the Rams. Again, I think they were so close that if you can make it work financially with Kupp and if he's okay with that role being the number 2 behind Puka Nacua, I think as long as you have Matt Stafford, you want Kupp as well in that offense. That doesn't mean don't try to upgrade. I think you want to add another receiver through the draft, maybe through free agency, but I personally think, yes, the Rams are a younger team. Like outside of Matt Stafford, they have a pretty young nucleus, especially on like the defensive side, that front seven. They are building for the long term, and it's why I got them not going all in on their approach with Stafford's contract. But they are so close that I would try to run it back and then improve that secondary through the draft. I really don't think they're far away. So is Kupp who he was in 2021? No. But I don't think he's like completely shot where you give him a full offseason of being healthy. I don't know. I kind of like the idea of just saying, hey, let's run it back if we're LA.
No, I'm with you there. And you talk about the secondary, and I think with where they're at in the back end of the draft, they have a great chance to add secondary. I know
that's
we're getting,
the move.
Deep into some names people might not know, but a guy like Malachi Starks out of Georgia, a guy like Nick Amamwari, who went nuts at the combine this weekend, even a guy like Jahdae Barron, who is more of a slot, but more of a cornerback than those other two guys are more safety types, but all of them super versatile that can play in the slot and make plays over the middle. I think if you're the Rams, you're in a position where you want to go after premium positions in the draft early, in my opinion. And when I say premium positions for people who may not, fully follow the jargon, you're thinking quarterback, offensive tackle, wide receiver, pass rusher, and cornerback. That's the premium positions that you really want to focus on in the draft. They have the most value. They get paid the most, all of that. But if you're the Rams and you're in a situation where you have a really nice young defensive line full of pass rushers and you took your pass rusher, you have Puka Nacua as your number one, a true number one top-level wide receiver in the NFL. You have your quarterback in Matt Stafford. You bring back Alaric Jackson on the offensive line this weekend as well. I mean, now you go to the secondary, and they could use some cornerback help like you're saying, but I think the Rams are in a position where if, let's say, Ashton Genty were to drop to him, you pair him with Kieran Williams. Let's say a Tyler Warren or a Colston Loveland at tight end, one of the defensive backs that I just talked about. Get a guy who may not be at a premium position, but is just a high-level football player that makes plays. I think the Rams roster is so good that they can afford to do that like we see other teams like the Ravens or like the Lions did with a couple of their picks in recent with Gibbs and Laporta. Like, I think the Rams are in a spot where, and especially in this draft too, where edge is a good spot, but like players 15 through 65 are pretty close in this draft. There's not a lot of first-round talent. So don't worry about premium positions at that point. Just take the best football player possible, and I think that could really move the needle for the Rams.
Yeah, and I keep saying this draft is like a meat and potatoes draft, right? It's really heavy on the trenches on both sides. It's not sexy, but if you just need, nobody's excited by toilet paper and all the essentials at the grocery store, but you got to get it, right? That's for the other teams. I think that actually benefits the Rams because some of these skill position players could get pushed down the board, and then, boom, you build around Matt Stafford, and you're good to go in 2025. They are an interesting team because it feels like they've been contending for so long, but they have such a young nucleus that they really aren't going away anytime soon. So now you just add those pieces, and I think they are a top 3 team in this conference.
Man, imagine Emeka Egbuka.
Right.
With the Rams.
I think that's such a Rams receiver. That's such a Rams receiver.
I know the way he blocks, how savvy he is, like, oh man, that
might be the perfect player for team like Link and day one. It just makes too much sense.
It does, especially if they were to trade Cooper Kupp to like Dallas or Pittsburgh or something like that. Replace him with Emeka Egbuka to go with Puka Nacua, Emeka Egbuka.
These names are tough. All the Rams receivers just sound like Nintendo characters, Tyler, to me.
You're not wrong. And I mean, this draft class, Armand Membo, but then you also have Mbo.
It's a tough class
Princely,
for names.
Umami Ellen, and it's a crazy year. But if we got through Kingsley Suamatai, we can get through anything. So with that being said, though, now that Matthew Stafford is back with the Rams, what do some other teams do that don't have a quarterback? All right, Louis, let's cap off today's edition of Locked On NFL. We talked about Deebo Samuel going to the Commanders. We talked about Matthew Stafford going back to the Rams and what that means for them. But let's talk about what Matthew Stafford going back to the Rams means for other teams. So we know that the Raiders were interested in Matthew Stafford, but the team that we heard went really hard for him over the past month was the New York Giants. And what the Giants do from here is quite a mystery because they really need to win games. And the GOAT, Patricia Traina from Locked On Giants, talked about the peculiar situation the Giants are in now.
But Shane seems to think that, if they get the quarterback situation correct, they will be in a better position to compete. And that may be true. I don't know that they'll necessarily catch the Eagles, but they'll certainly, I would think, win more than 3 games if they get the right quarterback in. So that all being said, they're going to take a swing at the quarterback, which they really, didn't start doing until last year, if you think about it. And just keep on doing it until they get it right. And here's the thing to remember, folks. Shane and Dable were both given a grace period by ownership. They have to win games in 2025. They can't use the excuse of, the quarterback class this year and the draft was garbage and we can't, we didn't have a chance or we didn't get this done or we didn't get that done. John Mara and Steve Tisch don't want to hear excuses. They want results.
So now we're hearing, since the Giants are out on Stafford, that they're pivoting to Aaron Rodgers. And I guess I'm just like, would you rather have Aaron Rodgers or Cam Ward? Like, I'm taking Cam Ward all day, even if I got to trade up.
See, Tyler, this is the problem with, if I was the Giants ownership, I would have either got rid of Shane and Dable this past year, considering the asset they have with this 3rd overall pick and the decisions. I wouldn't want a desperate coach and GM making a decision with such an important asset. If I'm the Giants owner, I'm either saying, I'm giving you a longer, Patricia mentioned a grace period. It shouldn't just be 1 year of you need to make the playoffs, because then you make stupid short-term decisions like bringing in Aaron Rodgers, or you go in on Matt Stafford. I don't think that made sense for the Giants from a long-term perspective. I don't think they're Matt Stafford away from competing with Philadelphia. That's the problem with this middle ground they're in. I would have either fully committed to a new regime this year and let them take a young quarterback, or say, hey, you have a couple years to be patient. Because now, the Giants head coach and GM, they're going to make selfish decisions to try to save their job, and I don't think that's the best decision long-term for New York.
And why would they worry about any future assets when they know that they could just be fired? It's like, you're going to lose all your money tomorrow. Why would you save anything? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. What I will say is, I agree they're not a quarterback away from competing with Philadelphia for a Super Bowl, but I think that they are a quarterback away from competitiveness. I think they are a quarterback away from fighting for a playoff spot, because you have left tackle in Andrew Thomas and you have a number 1 wide receiver. I mean, Malik Neighbors had 1,200 yards last year, 100 catches, with maybe the worst quarterback play in the NFL. On the defensive side of the ball, you have 2 decent pass rushers. Kayvon Thibodeau needs to step it up, no doubt. But Brian Burns, I think, is a great pass rusher. Dexter Lawrence, one of the best interior defensive linemen. I like Tyler Nubin at safety on the back end. I think Deontay Banks could, still be a good player. I think they actually do have some pieces at some key positions where I would argue, some home cooking for the Titans. I continue to say the Titans don't have 2 offensive tackles. The Titans don't have an edge rusher. The Titans don't have a number 1 wide receiver. You know what I mean? So it's like the Titans aren't a quarterback away to where they pick Cam Ward and they're competitive right away. But I think the Giants are a little bit closer to that competitiveness. So from that standpoint, I would much rather take a chance and trade picks and go up and get a guy, again, knowing that if it doesn't work, you're fired anyway.
Yeah, that's my exact reason, looking at the roster, why, if I were the Giants, this is the year to strike on a quarterback. Because I know I'm not a quarterback away from a championship, but I could be an Aaron Rodgers away from now being out of range next year to get the next crop of quarterbacks. So who knows? They're in that Pittsburgh Steelers middle ground. You got to be careful when you're these kind of teams of getting too good at the wrong time, and then you can't get that final piece. It's like having the car, but you don't have the driver. And so if I were the Giants, I would. If I was the ownership group, I don't know. I would be like, you're taking a quarterback with that. That's at least my approach. And I know Cam,
even if you guys suck, and even if you lose, and even if then at least I have my quarterback, and I can now hire a coach that fits best with him.
And I know that, again, you have to take every class individually. You have to add context to each one, and not just take a quarterback to take a quarterback. But sometimes teams, you never know when you're going to be up there again. And I think you do have, it's such a hard evaluation process. Sometimes you think a quarterback is not going to, he doesn't check any of the boxes and he ends up being the guy. It's not black and white with what quarterback's going to pan out. So I just think you keep throwing darts at the wall until one sticks. And so if I were the Giants, that at least would be my approach.
Yeah, I'm with you there. The other team in New York, though, they're curious because the Jets seem like a disaster, and it seems like they're super far away because of just the public perception. But they drafted Olu Fashanu, who should be a pretty good pass-protecting left tackle. Elijah Vera Tucker, injury concerns to the side, one of the better interior offensive linemen in the league. On defense, obviously, they have some talent, especially with Sauce Gardner in the secondary, and they've always been able, they have Jermaine Johnson and Will McDonald as edge rushers. They can continue to add there as well. So a lot of stuff there. Garrett Wilson on offense, like Breece Hall, they have some talent there. If you're the Jets and you can make a move up for a Cam Ward, would you do that, or do you think the Jets are better off? We're hearing maybe rumors that they could look at Justin Fields. Would you go that veteran placeholder route for the Jets, or do you think your roster is close enough to make that splash move for the quarterback?
See, I really like Cam Ward, so I'm willing to be more aggressive if I'm a general manager to go get him compared to the consensus. I actually think he is a player I'd be willing to take even with the first overall pick. So if I were the Jets, yeah, I would trade up. If the Titans are another team in the top 3 would be willing to move down, and I know I can get that guy, I don't think Shadur Sanders is worth moving up, but I think Cam Ward is. If not, if one of these teams are going to go for a bridge quarterback, I just like the idea of going for a younger player that could be the next Sam Darnold, the Justin Fields, in the right system that does pan out. Like if I'm a team like the Jets, maybe you just go all in on the run-first approach. You go Justin Fields and build an RPO-style offense around him. I think if you're not going to get one of these top 2 quarterbacks in this year's draft, Fields would be my next option. I just don't think it makes any sense to try with Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers. Those guys aren't good enough to win a Super Bowl. So unless you're just trying to save your job, I don't see the point of adding one of those guys to your starter.
No, I'm with you there. And I think another player that there's 2 other guys that kind of fit in that mold. I'm not going to sit here and sell it like it's going to work, but you could see a team saying, all right, we'll give this a shot for a year. Daniel Jones and Mac Jones. The 2 Joneses. I think Mac Jones is a guy who's kind of been washed away. He's a guy who I think, like Gardner Minshew, we're going to hear here in about 2 weeks when free agency kicks off, hey, we're going to give Mac Jones an opportunity to compete to be the starter.
It makes more sense than Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers. Like if I'm the Raiders, I would much rather have one of the Joneses or Justin Fields. But again, like Tyler, the thing is, we mentioned the Giants. These guys are trying to save their jobs. And that's the problem is when they don't have long-term security, this is how good teams or average teams stay average and bad teams stay bad.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I think Aaron Rodgers is the name right now in New York, but if Kirk Cousins is released, I could see the Giants getting Kirk Cousins and trading up to get Cam Ward and saying, hey, we've done everything we possibly can, ownership. Like, we got a veteran to play right now. We got you a young guy that could be the future of the franchise to get people excited. We have covered all of our bases. We win 7 to 8 games. Give us another season.
Yeah, it's actually a smart way to do it. And then because then if you start a second-year quarterback the next year that hasn't played, that's a kind of another grace period year where they're not going to fully judge you on playing a first-time QB. That might be the right approach if you're New York.
Kind of threads the needle of everything at one time. Yeah. I want to mention the Raiders as the last team. I think the Raiders are a team that makes a lot of sense for Sam Darnold at this point.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I think Sam Darnold is that other guy that just like waiting to see what Minnesota does. I think they're going to stick with J.J. McCarthy. After that, I think if you're a team like this, that's not, and it makes sense for the Raiders too, Tyler, because they're not going to be picking high enough to get, I think, Cam Ward or Sanders. So Darnold's probably the best of both worlds, where at least there's a chance he's a franchise quarterback still, and he's young. He's not a Russell Wilson.
Right, and you have a Max Crosby on the defensive line. And in theory, you have a Tyree Wilson who you drafted in the top 10 to be the other edge rusher. See if he steps it up. You do have some pieces on the offensive line. And then obviously Brock Bowers is a great player. Like there are some things there where you could tell yourself, hey, we get the right quarterback in here. Our roster is good enough to compete. And I mean, it was just a couple of years ago that the Raiders did go to the playoffs. They lost against the Bengals. But I mean, I don't think that the roster is so desolate with the Jets and with the Giants and with the Raiders that they couldn't, talk themselves into a veteran. But with that being said, I mean, it's going to be a crazy week. Free agency is just a week away. We're going to get more rumors, more news, stuff coming out of the combine. So much to talk about. It is a busy, busy time in the NFL, and we're going to keep you up to date here on the Locked On NFL podcast. Check out the afternoon edition of Locked On NFL with Tony Wiggins in the barbershop. That's going to be available a little bit later today, but that'll do it for us today. I am your host, the Madman, Tyler Rowland, the Legacy, Louis DiBiase, my co-host, as we tell you every single episode. Thanks for tuning in, and stay safe out there.